Hi, everyone. I'm here today with Alvin Graylin, a technologist and author, and we're going to explore the intersection of AI and XR and what that means for the geopolitics of the future. Alvin, did you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Alvin Graylin. I've been in the AI and XR and semiconductors and security space for 3 decades, and just really excited to see where this technology's come in the last 30, 40 years. I recently came up with a new book called Our Next Reality that talks about the intersection of these technologies and how it's going to impact us over the next decade. So I'm really excited to talk with you, Dr. Waku, and we can discuss kind of where we think things are going.
Yeah, I'm really excited as well. Alvin reached out to me, and I think that this will be a very interesting conversation alongside the other recent ones that we've had on my channel. We're planning to talk in three parts. First, the geopolitics of semiconductors. Second, the future of extended reality, or XR. And third, our future with AI. So let's get started with part one, the geopolitics of semiconductors. So, Alvin, you've told me that you spent like half your life in the US and half in China. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, well, I was born in China during the Cultural Revolution, and actually grew up on, was born on a re-education farm. But I was very fortunate that my mom is half Chinese and half American, and she was able to get us out of the country at the end of the Cultural Revolution. And I spent most of my formative years in the U.S. and have grown up here and got educated here. Went to University of Washington and MIT. But then, early in my career, I also got a chance to go back to China as well and see the rise of the PC industry over there, working with Intel, helping them open up their China office and running the consumer business there for a number of years. And came back to the States and did a few startups and then went back again in 2005 and did three different venture-backed startups over there. But the last 10 years I've been, or 9 years, I've been with HTC running their China business and having a very kind of forefront view of how immersive and extended reality technologies have emerged and its integration with AI as well. So we have a lot to talk about.
I guess that's a nice benefit, though, as someone working in or adjacent to semiconductors, being able to travel back and forth, fit into both worlds to some degree, and speak the languages.
Yeah, I mean, I was, my first jobs were with IBM and Intel, so both leaders in semiconductors at the time, and I was a part of the architecture team that helped to create both the PowerPC and some of the early Pentiums. And to see, America's dominance at the time in the semiconductor space, but now essentially that business is starting to wane quite a bit. And in fact, we were talking before the show about Pat Gelsinger. He was a youngest VP at Intel when I was there, and he just got fired yesterday from Intel after being brought back as the CEO. So it's unfortunate that America hasn't been able to keep its lead in terms of having manufacturing at least of semiconductors. The design here is amazing because you have companies like Nvidia that's doing a lot in Qualcomm, but the manufacturing has definitely moved to the east. So.
Yeah, having Pat leave the company was a real shock. I guess I didn't check, but the stock price must have gone down a lot from that because he was kind of steering the ship, or that was just my
Well, so
understanding.
surprisingly, actually, it went up slightly when they announced it, and then it went back down to where it was at the beginning of the day. So
Oh, okay.
apparently, he was a bit of a non-event, which was surprising. But the stock has definitely eroded significantly since he joined. So I guess that was the issue that the board had.
Can you tell us a bit about some of the other projects or companies that you were involved with in the past?
Sure. So one thing that we had talked about earlier is, in 2005, I actually founded the first conversational search company in China, mobile search. In fact, we were doing essentially what ChatGPT is doing now with GPT search, but in 2005 and using text messages because back then there was no smartphones and there was really no mobile internet. But you could send a question and you can find where things are. You could ask for stock prices. You could get measurements or get distances of things or directions and so it was a way to satisfy the daily needs of people. Definitely not as sophisticated as what's possible today with with today's large language models, but we did use a fairly sophisticated hybrid model that used both traditional lookup as well as more learning models. So, but that was kind of it was nice to see it realize today what we had envisioned back then in terms of having really long form conversations with a machine.
They always say that a huge part of a startup success is the timing, right? Like it sounds like you guys were ahead of your time. But so you could actually send text messages to an AI chatbot and it would respond, essentially. Is
Yeah,
that what you guys
yeah.
built?
In fact, we had that deployed with all three Chinese carriers, so hundreds of millions of users were able to access this. And people talk about job displacement. Even our very simple AI chatbot then was able to essentially displace about 30% of the customer support people they had at the operators, for these carriers. So it is a real thing. And even with primitive technology and with what's coming now, I think the displacement issue is going to be significant.
Given your perspective in China and the US and seeing the business world in both places, what's your opinion on the current geopolitical tensions, let's say, between the two countries?
Yeah, so I've spent essentially the last 18 years working in China, and I deal a lot with governmental agencies, and I was in kind of the media space, the search space. So people talk about the issues with censorship. It is a real thing, and and social media. Although I think there are definitely some misunderstandings of people say, oh, China blocked Google and blocked Facebook from operating in China. Is actually it's not really the case. It's really more they said if you operate by Chinese laws, you can stay. And if you look at Yahoo and Bing, they stayed. They said, okay, we're willing to follow the rules, and if there are issues, we're going to essentially self censor content that is concerns for the government. But Facebook and Google decided not to. So if you look at what's happening today with TikTok, TikTok saying, hey, willing to follow all the rules of America, just let us stay, and they're still running into issues. So in some ways, I think America's having a double standard in terms of how they're treating these issues. But in terms of the development there, over the last several decades, it's clear that China has definitely made a position for itself of trying to become more of a technology leader, and it has done so in a number of areas, everything from electric cars to solar to batteries to semiconductors, etc. And I think it's definitely made the country a more advanced place and a better place to live. There's also a lot of environmental issues because it's essentially is the factory for the world. So there's a lot of production kind of pollution that is being exported to China to bring products to the rest of the world. But and at the same time, it is increasing the standard of living for the country there, and the economic power that it has globally. It's become, I think, the number one trading partner for over 120 countries in the world now. So compared to where it was when I left, where it was essentially still a third world country.
I remember going to an AI conference and seeing the number of submissions from Chinese scientists, and it was like I think double or even triple the amount of the second largest country in terms of submissions, which was the U.S. So there's an incredible amount of technology, but also AI research that is going on through Chinese universities and also through Chinese expats. That
Yeah, for sure. I mean, China is producing, I think, more PhDs than any other country. In fact, I think three times more than the U.S. Right? So there's a lot of STEM graduates coming out of the country. In fact, I think that a recent study I saw show that something like 47-48% of all AI scientists in the world right now was born and at least some partially educated in China. And there are more top AI scientists in the U.S. work that were born in China than there are U.S. AI scientists born in the U.S. So it is contributing to the kind of the global development as a source of talent. So that is I think one of the contributions that it is making. Although you mentioned a lot of papers, there's definitely a lot of papers. I don't know, the quality of papers is still debatable.
that's the problem. Yeah, the historically the Chinese institutions seem to they have a lot of smaller and more local conferences, and they don't prioritize international peer review as much. So
But I think that that's also getting better too. So we were talking about some of the AI models coming out of China now, and just in the last couple of weeks, there's been multiple models that's been released that are on par or in some ways better than the O1 preview from OpenAI. And for small startup that's under 100 people to be able to and under a year and a half old to be able to achieve that is actually quite impressive.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next section. So, what made you leave China, or what job did you take when you left?
Well, actually, I am still working with HEC. I essentially took a role that was now more global because I wanted to spend more time with my daughters who just graduated from college before they grow up and move away. And I think that if I'm trying to have more impact in the world, I think being in America definitely has an ability to access the best talent in the world and more resources to get things done. So, I still have a lot of friends and a lot of connections in China, and I talk to them often. But I think right now for AI, the U.S. is still the center of innovation. So.
And historically, that was always the U.S.'s strength, right? Is the ability to attract the best people in the world, even when they weren't Americans, and give them access to the capital or the resources that they needed to build companies. And
Yeah, I mean, we can see that from all the major startups in the country. There's so much, I think more than half of them were either founded or is currently led by immigrants, right? So unfortunately, some of the policies might be changing because I was looking at some of the expected policies coming out of the Trump administration, and they are going to highly restrict kind of non-national, non-U.S. citizens from access to research and even working and developing this technology. So I think it may be a step backwards, kind of what happened in the early part of the initial Trump administration. I remember I was at MIT where I went to school and I was talking to the folks at the Media Lab, and then there was like this giant emergency. I was like, what's going on? He said, oh, well, Trump just started this new immigration policy, and half of our graduate students are now in danger of being deported. So I think we need to really rethink what's good for the country and what's good for the world in terms of what's made America successful in the technology space is the ability to import the smartest people in the world, and that changing that policy can be a real step backwards. So.
I totally agree. And I'm actually in Canada. I got to see a lot of different Canadian universities over time, and they often have the top students from countries that are unable to get US visas, particularly Iranians and other countries like that. And these students come because they have been admitted to MIT or Stanford or whatever, and they are spending some time at the Canadian institution just waiting. And oftentimes the visas just never come through. So Canada gets to keep these like star graduate students. And there are good reasons that the US has these types of relations, for example, with Iran. But I think it is counterproductive for the country to kind of keep out these people that would have historically been really the source of the strength.
Yeah, and especially when something like 80% of the graduate students that are here, they actually stay here and work here, and they build companies here. So I don't know why America would want to lose that advantage. But we were talking about this earlier, but I'm actually quite concerned over the escalation tension between the countries, because it feels like there's this brewing AI arms race, not only between US and China, but also Middle East and Europe. Everybody's trying to be the winner of this AI arms race, and to even frame it as an arms race, I think it's a very dangerous thing to do.
Yep, for sure. And I think we can dive more into that, but this seems like a good turning point for part number two, extended realities and AI. I wanted to talk about this because it seems like a real focus of yours, right? Like your book is about XR. And actually, can you first explain to our audience what XR is and the other associated terms?
Sure, sure. So XR is kind of I guess, overall term that people have created recently. XR standing for extended reality, that simplifies not having to say AR, augmented reality, VR, virtual reality, or MR, mixed reality. So, essentially grouping that all together. This is not a new technology. Actually, XR or immersive tech or VR all started around the same time as AI. They both started in the 50s and 60s. And a lot of it was actually funded by government and defense labs, both of them, and have now started to mature around the same time. So, I started studying both in the early 90s, and it's amazing to see that now they are both maturing and both starting to have a real impact. I've spent the last 9 years with HTC, and we're one of the global leaders in developing and releasing XR products. Things like this that So it's not the giant headsets of yesteryears. When I started, these things were 2.5 kilograms and lots of cables and wires everywhere. And you have wireless devices like what I showed that was like 200 grams, or now they're coming out with glasses like these that are 30 or 40 grams, that have displays, have AI built in, have mics, have the ability to interact. And I think we're going to see very soon a world where a screen on our face becomes our primary screens, compared to the one that is in our pocket or the one on our desk. So, and it's within the next 5 to 10 years, and that's going to significantly change our relationship with technology.
Before it flopped, I was one of the people who got a Google Glass, or rather, my lab got one. I wasn't paying for it, and we would have like little Ubuntu programs running, and you could kind of squint and see the screen there. But it always reminds me of way back in 2008. I actually met a researcher who had a special keyboard that he could operate one-handed. It had kind of several different shift keys and so on, and he had a kind of homemade wearable device which would basically hide one eye completely. Actually, I think it was the left eye would hide the eye completely, but you could see. And he was running an Ubuntu terminal, and he gave me the glasses to try it out, and that was really fascinating for me. So it almost seems like this virtual reality and other XR type things are maybe now entering the time when the timing is right for the technology to be adopted by the mainstream.
I also had the Google Glass, and it's definitely ahead of its time. And it was also not really ready for prime time because it ran out of battery after about 40 minutes, and it was just a little bit too obvious. But when you start getting to kind of the form factors I just showed, where they either look like sunglasses or goggles, or in some cases normal glasses, it becomes a lot more socially acceptable. In fact, I've been wearing these Metas, the Ray-Ban Metas, that as my daily wear glasses. And most people don't even know that they are smart glasses. Right? They don't have displays yet, but very soon we're going to have multiple vendors that are coming out with things that are that form factor with displays. In fact, there's already some out there. I think like Brilliant Labs or even Realities are companies that already have ones that are essentially the same form factor with displays. And I know there's probably 3 or 4 right now that I've spoken to who coming out of China that will have kind of the colored dual displays that look like these form factors within the next year. So when these things become available, they will no longer become the gimmicky thing that the Google Glass was. And because of the social acceptability now of technology, and people aren't as concerned, I think, as they once were.
Yeah, I was in a Best Buy the other day, and I was really surprised to see those Ray-Ban glasses, like with the two little cameras on each side. I had no idea that technology was, that far ahead in terms of commercialization, that it would appear.
It's actually only one camera. The other side is a light. It's a light indicator to let you know that it is taking a picture or a video of you, so that you don't feel your privacy is invaded. So
Meta actually gave you something to tell if your privacy is being invaded. How nice of them.
yeah, no, I mean, I know. Well, because that was the issue with the Google Glass. That's why people call them glass holes, because they was like, why are you recording me? They're like, I'm just worrying, I'm not recording, and then people get into fights. But I think it's definitely a lot better now, because when I wear this thing outside in the events, most people don't know, and the ones who do, they're like, oh, so does this really work? And I would show them, I click it, and it would turn on the light, and they're like, oh, okay, now I feel safer. So it's the social acceptability is actually probably a bigger issue than the technology issue at the time.
And that's very smart of them, right? Like most of the time, like if you have a camera on your laptop or something, the same thing happens, right? There's a little light that turns on so that you know when your webcam's in use. And that really helps people feel much more familiar with it.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about your book. You wrote a book on XR, and what inspired you to write it, and what audience are you hoping to reach?
Yeah, so it's actually a book I co-authored with Louis Rosenberg. So we're both veterans of the industry. We've both been in AI and XR for 30 plus years. So it's not a book about XR. It's actually a book about how these two technologies are going to combine and integrate, and its impact on society. In fact, Neil Stevenson, you probably know, he's a very famous sci-fi. He wrote the foreword for the book as well. So I'm really glad for his support. And the idea is actually it's a debate between Lewis and I. So he takes the pessimist view, and I take the optimist view. And so essentially on the top 13 questions that we think are facing the world, we give you both views, and we force you to listen to both sides, because so many books today are essentially one-sided because an author has a perspective that they want to sell you. And we wanted you to understand both the negative and the positive ramifications of this technology, so that you can come up to your own conclusions. And at the end, we say, here's all the things that you can do, whether you're an AI lab or you're a policymaker or you're a corporate leader or you're a student, what you need to do to play a role so that you can actually help bring society to a better end.
I was going to say, I couldn't believe that you played the pessimist. You seem far too optimistic to me.
Oh no, no, yeah. So I'm the optimist. Although, I actually understand all the pessimistic issues, but I choose to be an optimist because I look at history and I see how much technology has benefited the world over millennia. And you have to be optimistic on the long term, but you actually have to be pessimistic on the short term. So being able to be pessimistic short term, you see the dangers and you avoid them or you get ahead of them so that you can then reach the optimistic long term outcomes.
When I was in my PhD, I spent a lot of time learning about speech recognition because I had developed this issue with my hands. And I was talking to some researchers that were doing HCI research and so on and asking them, like, what types of devices can I use? What can I use? And this guy, the most forward thinking guy, was like, eventually there'll be a screen that you don't have to touch and you can just talk to the computer and you can do all your work from the beach. And it was such an interesting vision. But I was really into the nitty gritty of like how speech recognition worked at the time. And it was just so far off, or it felt so far off. And I was like, how is this really going to be possible? And he said, as soon as you combine multiple modalities together, things will start to accelerate. So I think that maybe he's right.
Yeah, I mean, if you have any time to use the voice mode on OpenAI, you can see that the conversational capabilities are amazing today. And in fact, I also started with AI in the speech recognition side. I did natural language processing, kind of voice activation and voice processing systems in '92, and built my own systems. I had to, actually had neural network chips that we had custom made, or actually just came out, and we had ordered them to do these processing. And it's amazing to see what's capable now versus before. It was much more of a command and control system, whereas now you can really have free form conversations, and it's actually sounds very plausible. Everything that comes back is plausible, and in many cases better than I think most humans can do.
In the space of like 7 or 8 years, we went from everybody hard coding all of the features that were used in the speech recognition systems to, oh, we'll just use a deep learning model and it will learn everything. Like when deep speech came out, everyone was like, oh my gosh, an end to end deep learning system. And then suddenly now you have like, oh, actually, we're just going to learn all the languages at once and we're going to recognize all human speech, even with disfluencies and all of this. And of course, it plugs in and combines with generative AI so that you can use this to actually have a conversation. So it's really incredible to see that like combinatorial explosion there.
Yeah, I mean, and it's made possible because of the improvements in processing, right? I mean, we had to do the things that you said because it was such you had such limited compute, limited memory, limited all these other things that you had to take shortcuts and try to do things that made it work with what you had at the time. But now, when essentially with zero constraints now, because you can make these models look at the entire internet, and you have hundreds of thousands of GPUs in a cluster that you can use to train. Those things were unimaginable before, and these things are only getting bigger. And that's why I'm very optimistic about the potential for this to really get to that the next phase, and and really reach AGI a lot faster than people, than probably most common people. I know the industry is starting to gravitate to a much closer timeline. But if you look at Metaculus just 6-7 years ago, I think the average was something like 2080 for AGI, and it's now come down to 2029 or 2030.
Last I checked, it was 2036. So I guess it's gone down even more since then.
Yeah, so it's where when if you listen to Musk or Altman, they're saying next year, right? So and I hope it doesn't come next year, because that may be too quick for society to be able to respond to it. We actually may want to slow down to give it time, not because we can't get there. Even if we can, we may actually want to do it in a more responsible way, so the more considered way.
Yeah, it seems like society needs time to really safely undergo large changes. If you try to do too much at once, you get tears in social fabric. Like people's jobs get lost, and their way of life and the things that they want to do and so on just become not possible anymore, and it's very disruptive.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the prior industrial revolutions, respectively, they took 80, 60, and about 40 years to take place, right? And what we're talking about is this next wave is going to be a 5 to 10 years max. And, when you're working with a physical world and billions of people, that's just not enough time, especially when we have governments that move at the pace that they do, and how behind they are in understanding this technology. Before we were talking about UBI and the importance of that, and America, for all the advances it has in the technology side, is actually quite behind in terms of the social services side. I spent a lot of time recently in Europe, and they are much more open to that, to implementing UBI systems on a generic basis or general basis compared to the US, which seems to be consistently seeing it as a welfare state, and trying to stop it from happening.
I always tell people when asked about UBI that yeah, it'll probably happen in Canada, but the US is probably like much lower down on the list, right? They can afford it because there's enough wealth floating around, but the political will was just it would be very difficult.
That's just the sad part. You look at Europe, where the GDP per capita is actually about two-thirds of the US, and they have much better support system, support safety nets for their citizens, and Canada as well. And for a country that has that much productivity and wealth, to not have that type of level of support for its citizens is a little bit, it's kind of criminal, actually. And it's going to be increasingly important going forward, particularly in the US, because US is around 65% white collar workers. And those are the first people that are going to be impacted by AI induced job displacements.
People always think, oh, the United States, the way that they run their economy is the reason for their success. But I always think, how much is correlation and how much is causation, right? Because the US was just set up in this amazingly powerful position at the end of World War II because it had all the benefits of having run a wartime economy and all the benefits of never having had a battle on its soil.
Exactly. Yeah. And also becoming the global reserve currency, so that it, it,
Yes.
it became essentially dictating the policies around the world. It had the World Bank, it had the IMF, it had the UN all located on its soil. So it really became the de facto global hegemon. And when you're in that position, you were able to dictate a lot of rules that are beneficial to you. In addition to what we talked about earlier in terms of bringing all the greatest minds around the world and being able to attract that and to create the innovation engine that it has. So Mario Draghi recently wrote a report to the European Union saying, how they're behind. And he said, if you take away the technology sector of the US, the rest of the country actually has grown at the same pace as Europe. So really, there's only kind of one major difference is the technology sector. Right. I think people over associate the success of America based on its governing rules versus maybe just the fact that the technology sector did so well here, and the education system allowed it to feel attracting the right people, and then those people stayed, and then and also indigenous people too. I mean, local people have also benefited from the education system and the availability of financing, and the venture capital and angel model that has really fueled innovation in the country, and as well as actually some government funding. A lot of the internet, GPS, a lot of things have actually come out of in virtual reality. A lot of these things have come out of defense and national spending as well. So
Going back a little bit on what you were saying, it's almost like you could, once you have that level of success, you could shape your government and your social structures and so on however you wanted, and still continue to just double down on that existing lead, right? I mean, we'll never know, but it seems quite plausible that could have happened. And on your other point about the defense funding, that's definitely true. Like in other countries like Europe and Canada, the money for science is very clearly like general purpose science research, and that has to cover a lot, almost everything that happens in universities. But in the US, they can say, you know what, this particular type of science research is beneficial for the military, for defense. And that was such a part of the psyche of the United States that lets them push through big projects that cost a lot. And yet everybody's happy because it's like, defense spending, which for me, living in the US and studying there was always like this dual-edged sword. I don't necessarily want to be doing defense stuff, but on the other hand, like where would this money come from? If it was just labeled like, general computer science research, then it probably gets downvoted. So it's an interesting system.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you need certain excuses to have that will to spend. But if you look at, the counterpoint, you look at China, they've actually put their money a lot more into infrastructure building. So they built, highways and roads and power stations and schools and all these other things that have helped to grow the economy. So, you don't always have to use defense as the reason. Unfortunately, the US has a very strong military industrial complex that it's hard to get budget away from them. The US spends more than the next, I think, 11 countries combined, right? Even today. So, in that type of a scenario, I guess if you want to do some kind of interesting things that require a lot of money, appealing to that the defense industry might be a way to get the budgets, right?
And today, it seems like you can appeal to the defense industry or just say that you're making a new AI frontier model. Either of those seems to work.
Yeah, although honestly, I think AI frontier models are right now the fastest depreciating asset in the world, right? I mean, essentially, you spend $1 billion building a model within 2 to 3 months, some open source model has, performed as well, in some cases better. And, so for you, was it worth it to build those, 10 billion or soon $100 billion data centers to do these training? I feel like especially when we start creating the same systems. Essentially, if you look at the hundreds of labs around the world, they're all using this essentially the same algorithms, using the same data sets, using the same GPUs, and smart people from different parts of the world, but they're not combining resources. They're all trying to duplicate each other. It feels like we could progress a lot more as a society if we actually work together versus trying to divide our limited resources.
Speaking of companies that are building frontier models, though, I think Fei Fei Li got like $100 billion or something, and her startup was in stealth for a long time. And didn't it just come out yesterday?
Yeah, so they just released a new model. They have I think a little over $1 billion valuation. So I think the $100 million. They didn't get 100
Oh,
billion. I think
$100 million. Okay, that makes more sense.
they got $100 million on a over $1 billion valuation, but for a company that's less than 6 months old, that's not too bad. And it is actually a quite interesting thing that they just released yesterday. They were showing essentially the ability that you put a photo, and I can turn that photo into a 3D world. And so it's essentially a photo to 3D model, whereas existing models are more kind of prompt to video or prompt to picture. And actually, you also have some photo to video. So this is kind of an extension of the kind of photo to video concept. And at the same time, they also allow you to navigate inside these worlds. So you can start, it's rendering things in real time, and you can go to any place. You can also create different camera angles. You can create different depths of views, and kind of different focal effects. So it is something that will be significant benefit to anybody who's creating 3D content today, because content creation in 3D has been a real burden for people in the space because it's so expensive, and AI has not really gotten to that area yet. But for it to now be essentially almost free or instant to be able to create new worlds and new content, I think this really will make devices on your head a lot more palatable, because now there's more reasons to use it and there's less reasons to take it off. It's coming from the XR industry. One of the biggest issues we saw was that people who buy these things within a month, they're spending most of his time in a drawer because they ran out of content. But if you have a way to use AI to essentially prompt worlds or prompt games, just I think a few weeks ago they had the Doom AI engine where you could essentially fully render a diffusion model for Doom, and then you can also do a prompt to make some simple games. Very soon we're going to be able to prompt, take a novel and say, okay, turn this novel into a world for me, and I want to play the main character. When that happens, we're never going to run out of content.
Yeah, looking at Fei Fei Li's demos or the company's demos, it was really astonishing because you just start with a picture and then you are suddenly in that world and you can look around. And I once had to explain to an artist who had like drawn something, and she was like, "Why can't I just like rotate the image and look at it from a different angle?" And this is way before generative AI, right? It's like, sorry, pixels don't work that way. But now they do, and that's so incredible.
There's an example of an immigrant, AI scientist who came from China, who's now playing a significant role in helping advance AI in a new area. And I actually was lucky enough to speak at her lab at the human AI, the High Lab, was it AI for Humanity or something lab about the things in my book. So Eric Brynjolfsson, who's one of the co-directors of the lab, was my thesis advisor at MIT. So it's kind of funny to see this whole thing kind of circling back and me going able to speak at his lab. So, but I think they're doing amazing things, and I wish them the best of success because I think the XR and administrative industry will highly benefit from that type of progress.
I wanted to circle back on something we mentioned in the first part, which was DeepSeek, this new Chinese firm that released a really strong reasoning model. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so about a week and a half ago, this company who just was formed in the middle of 2023 and had less than 100 research scientists, was able to bring out a AI model that has reasoning, and on a number of areas of testing have actually outperformed the preview model from OpenAI o1. So that's something that people thought would take a significant amount of time for open source models to catch up on. And in the past, open source used to be more the French models or some UK models, but now to have a China model take that leading position, I think is actually quite impressive, especially considering the constraints that they had in terms of how much GPUs they were working with. I think they had about 10,000 GPUs that they were using for training compared to the hundreds of thousands that are available to OpenAI and XAI and and to Google for them to be able to catch up. That's and in such a short time is it's a testament to, I think, both the ingenuity of the Chinese teams, but also a sense that says that, hey, constraining GPUs may not be as effective as American governments think in terms of limiting progress in places like China. And particularly, I think for the reasoning models, because they're so focused on inference, that much more of it is now going to be on the runtime end. So test time compute versus training compute is going to be significantly more important. And in that case, there's going to be other types of chips that can be used for inference acceleration. And if people are willing to let it run longer, it can even, it doesn't necessarily require specialty hardware. So I think the strategy of trying to use choke points to limit China progress is actually backfiring, and it's creating more local ingenuity in terms of how to do more with less resources, which may actually allow China to overtake in some areas because they may find new algorithmic breakthroughs that was not available because they were forced to do so. And they say what is a necessity is the mother of invention, right?
I'm definitely familiar with that. I actually missed though that DeepSeek was open sourcing their model. That's very interesting.
Yeah, it's open sourcing. So it's actually producing something that's going to be helping the rest of the world. It's not something where they're not trying to create a closed model as what OpenAI is doing of creating a national model. And we were talking about this earlier, where you have people like Anthropic who are supposed to be about safety, and now they're working with the defense industry and utilizing their system to help make warfare more efficient, make killing more efficient. I think that's a little bit hypocritical of what Dario is doing with his team. So and Llama as well. I think. Llama was also announced with Meta to doing the same thing.
Part three, our future with AI. So different ways of looking at how we could have our future with AI, right? I only recently heard about defensive acceleration. That's kind of interesting, but can you tell us a bit about your thoughts on these different strategies?
Yeah, so I mean, right now there's kind of three major paths that people talk about. There's the doomer path, or the decel path, which is saying we need to stop because this is going to kill us all and there's nothing good ahead. And then there's the effective accelerationist who says we need to go as fast as possible because technology only brings goodness and the world is going to be better. And innovation has a path to utopia. And then you have the path that from the Ethereum guys, who's saying, hey, we need to have decentralized acceleration. Finding the right path and then only doing that and avoiding the bad stuff, and then decentralizing it so that multiple people are working on it, and and the good guys with the gun can kill the bad guys with the gun, and all these things. And I think each of them have some reasoning, and from their perspective makes sense. But I don't know if the whole doomer thing of the future is always going to be worse. makes sense if we look back on history and seeing how much goodness has been brought from technology. So there we need to be definitely careful with it because all technology is a double-edged sword, right? But then the effective accelerationist seems to have no sense of the need for safety, just saying, hey, let's just go as fast as possible, and that's the only way. And even if bad things happen, in the long run it'll be good. And we know that that's not the case, and we've seen that with both social media, with nuclear technologies, with other things where we need to put safeguards in. I don't know if the whole defensive or decentralized accelerationist model also works because they still see that there's something chasing us and we have to run. I actually don't think there is a bear. I don't think that there's a need for us to say we have to go as fast as possible. And I also don't think it's a choice of going to the good or the bad. It's actually, we will see bad as we go through to get to the good. It's actually part of the path. And to know that it is a absolute certainty that we will encounter the bad, that we should actually be able to prevent the bad before we get there, or actually minimize the bad because it's probably not preventable.
I think there might be a bear. Some people have heard of the term Moloch, right, which is the name of the agent that is kind of forcing everybody to race ahead. What are your thoughts on that?
But the whole Moloch idea is that it is a fictional character that is leveraging the internal drive and competition between humans. So it itself is not actually a danger. It is creating danger by leveraging the biases and faulty rationale within humans. So what I actually am proposing, and if you can at some point put up this chart that in kind of the graphs that I sent you, I think that'll help to more give an understanding of what maybe the a fourth choice that actually makes more sense is what I call collaborative acceleration. Is that by pulling together our data, pulling together our compute, and pulling together our talent, we can actually find a way to get to a safer, more holistic view of AI versus the current sovereign AI idea that people talk about. Every country make their own, and it's based on your data, your ethics, your culture, your values. And that sounds good in principle, where you say, oh, everybody's represented. But what that really means is that now we create 200 or 193 AIs, each country having their own AI, each seeing themselves as the good guys, and everybody else of the 193 as the bad guys. So you're creating innate competition that then accelerates this Moloch paradox, where you're accelerating something that you think is doing good, but is actually creating greater harm.
I would agree with that.
And we by having this race, we throw away all the safety guardrails. And you like right now, you hear what the policies that are being suggested by the new administration that's coming into the US. They're saying, screw all this safety mindset. We just need to go fast. We have to get there before China gets there.
I heard from a source in the U.S. government that like any law that has the word AI and safety somewhere is just going to get scrapped, which doesn't seem like exactly a positive thing. But
I think it's a danger because of this the exact issues that we've seen in the past. And you look at the nuclear weapons and what happened there. And when in fact their new program is going to be called the Manhattan Project for AI, right? That's kind of a little bit ominous, to utilize a weapon metaphor. And we know what happened with the Manhattan Project. Within months of us developing it, we used it, and we used it essentially after we knew the war was over, because this was already when they started, creating the plans of how they want to restore Europe and rebuild Europe. Those plans were already engaged, and essentially Russia and US was about to come in and invade Pan, and there was signs that they were probably going to surrender, and they still dropped the bomb because they said, well, we spent all this money making it, we got to use it, and by the way, by using it, we also demonstrate to Russia that we're the most strongest nation, and by ending the war faster that way before they come in, we don't have to divide Japan up between US and Russia like we did with Germany. So there was a lot of I guess non-ethical or maybe non-global aspects of why they did it. A lot of it was really about power grabbing for the US because they had this weapon, and when you have it, you're not forced, but you're tempted to use it. right? Just like there's something called the Kirchhoff's law in movie making. They're saying whenever a gun is introduced in a scene, within 2 or 3 scenes it will be used, right? And essentially that's what's happening with if we're going to make this thing where it's going to be used and it's going to be played as a weapon or designated as a weapon, it will be used. And when we use a weapon that is essentially a superpower that allows us to whether attack people's power systems or people's or countries food systems or their communication system, it will be used. And when you do that, people are going to respond. Countries, even if they're saying, hey, even if you're a few months ahead of me in your AI development, at some point I'm going to catch up. I'm going to do the same to you. And if I don't, maybe I'll send a missile to bomb your data center. And then the back and forth of that happening is only going to escalate the problem. And I feel like American policymakers just don't realize. And I've been talking to a lot of them, and I got to tell you, they are in the mindset that we can win this race because we have certain advantages. We are years ahead, and we're going to get even further ahead because we have more processors and more GPUs and blah blah blah. And we can see from what we just talked about that gap is closing. And the things that prompted us to think we can win are no longer a reality. And in that case, does it make sense to even fight this fight? Because if you're fighting a fight that you can't win, in fact, if you're fighting a fight that will only end global devastation or destruction, or at least downgrade, why fight that?
I want to focus a little bit though on the Moloch question, because I think Moloch is not just like innate human desire for competition. It's more of a game theoretic argument, actually. It's basically saying, like, suppose I don't have perfect information about other parties around me. I can either cooperate with them, as they have said they will do with me, but if they're actually backstabbing me, I might end up in a very poor situation. So, if you had perfect information, it would work out. But
Yeah. So if you go to game theory and you're essentially talking about game theory and the prisoner's dilemma, and in a single shot prisoner's dilemma game, the optimal result is, you probably know, is to defect, is to do the negative thing and accuse your partner because that will minimize your downside. But the world is not a one shot game. The world is an infinite game, a long term game. And in the long term game of prisoner's dilemma, the best strategy is tit for tat.
the best strategy in an iterated prisoner's dilemma is to cooperate until they start defecting, and then you just defect, I think.
Exactly. It's tit for tat, but to always start with cooperation, because in cooperation you both get off and you're done, right? So that's the benefit for everybody. And in this case, we're actually starting off a long-term game with defection as the default, which is the worst case that you can do, because now you have an infinite game of the worst case outcome, right? So we really should learn from game theory. If you think that the Moloch model or the game theory model is the right way to think about it, and we see the world as a long-term game, then the only choice is actually to do what you just suggested, which is a tit for tat, with always starting off with cooperating. So we need to start off now cooperating, because when we cooperate, we will be able to pull those resources, get to AI, get to a smarter AI faster that can help us solve our health issues, our climate issues, our energy issues. And then when you do that, the world becomes a better place, and we remove the need for conflict, right? Because why are we fighting these wars? It's because we want to get oil or resources or money. And in a world where we no longer have those needs, when we have, essentially all the food we can have, all the energy that we can use, we don't want to fight wars anymore. We don't, doesn't matter that, what nuclear weapons you have or what hypersonic weapons you have. It doesn't matter anymore, because nobody wants to send their kids around the world to fight somebody else to get their oil, right? It doesn't matter anymore. So we need to get to that place faster. And the only way to do that is to create a more advanced AI that actually has the ability to solve real scientific breakthroughs. Whereas the real danger that we have today is actually not AGI. The real danger that we have is advanced narrow AI, because those are the things that can be used by bad actor groups who want to target specific issues. So if I want to make an advanced AI that can create a super virus, and those actually already, a lot of them already exist, right? And then to go fabricate it in some wet lab, you could do a lot of damage, right? If I want to create a advanced AI that can do very advanced cybersecurity solutions that can go and target everybody's network and survey them, and you already have things like Pegasus, and I'm sure you're familiar with that, and what it already does with just without AI, they're able to create systems that can essentially infiltrate any phone and get any information you have. So to be able to survey any human on Earth with a cell phone, right? And this is already being used, being available to the highest paid buyer, right? So I think that those kind of dangers are much worse. Or I think recently there was a narrow AI model that was able to create poisons, and they could create poisons that was like 1,000 times more dangerous than anything that occurs in nature. So those are the kind of things that actually I think we need to be very careful with, and to regulate and to keep them in labs, just like we do some of the high threat viruses that people are doing gain of function with, which I actually don't think we need to be or should be doing. Right. So those are the things that are the danger. The AI itself, AGI, is actually a much more of a even though it could have dual use, the civilian positive use cases are much higher than the negative use cases of it.
So just to play devil's advocate a little bit, if everybody was an optimist, as you are, then it's easy to see the world as an iterated prisoner's dilemma, and cooperation makes sense. And I mean, I'm also an optimist. That's why I'm saying I'm playing devil's advocate here. But I think the correct kind of game theoretic approach for modeling like interstate behaviors and stuff is not really a prisoner's dilemma, because in a prisoner's dilemma, there's actually, if both people cooperate, they could still look at it after the fact and go, I would have gotten a higher payout if I had actually defected. So it's not actually a stable Nash equilibrium, right? You might both cooperate, but you're both kind of somewhat unhappy about it. You can instead model it as a Staghunt game, which is where, if both players cooperate, then there's a strictly higher payout than if one cooperates and one defects, or also, of course, if both defect. And when you have that kind of model, there's no short-term incentive to actually cheat. Let's say it's an iterated prisoner's dilemma, but then someone new gets elected and they come in and they go, hey guys, we can just like nuke this place and take that land for ourselves. Right? They start thinking about it as a short-term problem. And the only way that you can actually look at it as a long-term problem is when you can verify that other people are actually doing what they say they would.
Well, the thing is, because you're not limited to this one dimension to work with, the ramifications are so large that it does not make sense to defect, right? Especially when let's say if you work together and you create this super AI and everybody shares the benefits of it, what is the benefit of defecting, right? Why do you need more power anymore? What would be the benefits of then creating another AI? You don't need to, because you already have the best one, right? And in fact, by working together, by pooling resources, you're going to have a better one than you could get by yourself, right? So it doesn't make sense to create another side project. When you essentially have a God model, there's not much more you can do from doing something independently. It actually makes more sense to keep feeding that bigger model.
However, people might have vendettas, like perhaps their countries are long term enemies or something like that. And they're like, we're all doing great, but I wish that these guys didn't have access to our crazy good model, right? There's still going to be frictions between people that shouldn't exist, but like they may, and in some cases they will.
I think a lot of the friction that we have are manufactured, right? Whether it's conflict between races, conflict between countries, conflict between religions. These are things that we have created to unite an in group, and so that you can have that resource of that in group to then overcome deficiencies you have, or to be able to have the strength to gain access to some scarce resource. When you have achieved ASI or AGI, then essentially we have no longer scarcity and no longer a need to be able to create that group so that you can accumulate power.
That is true, game theoretically speaking. But imagine that that happens today. There will be all these people who are currently in power thinking, oh, I should just keep doing what I've been doing, or being upset with where they are. In other words, the social transition to that state and having everybody accept that that is the state of the world. It's not like a bad thing, but they have to change their mindset. That seems tricky.
I think what will need to happen is that there needs to be, probably essentially the US and China first have to agree, because they're right now the two major powers that have the most likelihood to create something on their own. if they agree to come together and then they say, okay, whatever we create, if you join our group and we all become essentially, I know it's very idealistic, we all become kind of one, united nations of the world, true united nations, and we share the benefits of this, then there's really very little incentive for any government to say, I don't want to be part of that. Because by being outside of that, you essentially are saying, well, it's like back in the days when you had just a camp, a tribe with fire, another tribe that didn't have fire. You're like, I want to join the group that knows how to make fire, because that allows me to survive better. So this is the that having that model will be able to essentially incentivize everybody to come together, because now I can solve all your health issues of your people. Do you want that, right? And now I can give you all the energy that you can need, so you can have first world living conditions for everybody in your country. If you look at the every developed country, they actually, the higher their per capita energy use, the higher the quality of living, right? And there's no third world country right now that has a high power usage, and there's no first world country that has a low power usage. So by having essentially the ability to have new science, new let's say higher efficiency solar cells. We don't even need to talk about fusion, right? Just higher efficiency solar cells that get past 20-30% to 50, 60, 70%. And there's now new materials that are not silicon based that can actually be made much cheaper. So all these things where essentially I think every day we have 5,000 times the energy that we use in a year shined on the planet. So there's lots of energy. We're not low on energy. We just not properly using it. And if we actually utilize fission better, fusion better, geothermal, we essentially have free energy. And if you have free energy, then you essentially can turn any salt water into fresh water. You can essentially turn any matter into any other matter, right? So you essentially get to Star Trek, right? If we get to Star Trek, what happens in Star Trek? I'm sure you're a Trekkie. You get the Federation. You get a world where people work because they love it, because they don't have money. There's no wars. And it's the only utopian sci-fi that actually is sustainable, and that people point to, and it's popular. It seems like everybody wants to make dystopian sci-fi, or but it is, I think it is possible to get to that utopian world. And if you watch Star Trek, you know that the reason that the Federation started was because the Vulcans came, an alien species that brought advanced technologies and more rationality. We right now have the advantage that we don't have to wait for an alien. We are creating our own Vulcans. We are creating an alien species that will be able to bring advanced technology and solve our problems. So let's work together and make that happen, versus fight off and everybody makes their own alien and then using an alien to fight each other. That is completely just insane.
I think I finally get a good perspective on like what a world of abundance actually looks like listening to you, right? Because I think a lot of people have trouble identifying all the different ways that it would be better and how that looks in a bigger picture. But no, I think you're right. We are making an alien species. Why do we need multiple alien species? Let's try to make it a logical alien species that actually helps us cooperate, keeps us in the good states of every game theoretic interaction that we are involved in, such that we get to the like post scarcity world where, at that point it doesn't really matter anymore because the conflicts don't really matter. You're not going to be fighting over more resources because you have all the things you need. I'm just more worried about the transition period, but I think that you painted an interesting picture there too. So
Yeah, I think that the most dangerous time in the world would be the next 5 to 10 years, because that is a transition. And if we get past that 10-year time frame and we transitioned over to getting ASI in a safe way that we're sharing, we're going to have a million years of prosperity and abundance. But in the same vein, in the next 5 to 10 years, if we don't make the right decisions as a world, if the policymakers are continuing the current trajectory, we will likely have a catastrophic event that will equate to kind of what happened when the dinosaurs went away. And we're going to have to restart, and maybe some little squirrel somewhere is going to become the next human. Or at least society will move back hundreds of years and we have to reinvent everything again, right? And when you see the stark contrast of those two possible futures, there's a lot of incentive for us to work together, because no matter how much you can gain as an individual or as a narrow group by trying to take advantage of a short-term benefit of applying this technology for your in group, the downside are so big that it's not worth it.
We may not end up putting this in the final video, but I did want to ask you a little bit about existential risk, right? Because I agree with what you're saying to the point of like once you develop superintelligence, it's likely to be much better or much worse depending on how humans themselves manage it. But there's also this small risk off to the side, of course, or large risk depending on who you talk to, that AI itself would be the actor that misuses superintelligence.
So let's talk about that. Actually, I think that's worth chatting about. And I know a lot of your prior guests have been on the other side of saying that AGI is the real danger. But I'm happy to give my perspective.
Yeah, please. Yeah. What do you think? What's your perspective?
So you hear a lot of people say, there's very little examples of a less intelligent species or a culture being able to manage or influence a more intelligent, animal, right, or species or culture. And I actually don't think that that's really the case. If you look, when if you have, I don't know if you have kids, but if you have kids and they go to a store and they're like, "Oh, mom, dad, I want to have this, or I want to buy some dessert." I mean, what do you do? Most of the time, you're like, "Okay, sure. Well, you can get what that's a nice new toy. I want to have something my friends just got." You generally give them what they have, even though you're more intelligent, you're more experienced, more knowledgeable, but you pretty much still fall, for their requests. If anybody has a pet, okay, maybe we're not as smart as a child to this ASI, but at least we should be as smart as a dog, right? And how many of us have been buying clothes and toys and food and whatever for our pets, and and when it wants to go out, it's able to control us and make us take them out for a walk or to do whatever, right? And maybe we're not even as smart as a dog to these ASI, right? But I think we're at least as smart as, let's say, bacteria. Okay, so we have about the same number of cells as there are bacteria in our body. So we're actually about half bacteria, half human. And the bacteria's influence our brains in terms of controlling our appetite, our sex drive, our attitude, our mood. It's able to make us eat things, to do things. When a bacteria that has no brain is able to control how a 40 trillion cell being that is supposed to be the apex animal in the world, how we behave as individuals and in turn as a culture. I think that shows that there are ways for a less developed being to influence us. Now, I'm not saying we can control it 100%, but I think we definitely have a influence. And that's not even, to say that given that this AI is actually trained from our culture, from our history, from our language, from our pictures, it has so much of us in it that it would see us as its ancestors, as its parents. And what does our cultures mostly say about our parents? We respect them, we care for them, we want them to be well, we want to keep them healthy, right? And given that that's the way that we are training it, I think we have a pretty good chance that even without putting in discrete guardrails of saying you will not hurt humans, that the smarter these systems get, they will innately actually have those beliefs, right? Just like if you talk to the most wisest people in the world and the most enlightened, they're usually people who have read a lot, they've traveled the world, they speak multiple languages, they understand everybody's perspectives, and then they like, I can't blame them for doing that. I can understand where they come from. I don't agree with them, but I can understand it. And here's how you might be able to solve this problem with a nonviolent way or whatever, right? And the mentors I have are always like that. They're not saying, here's the way that you can screw that guy, you know. And it's usually like, just let it go because it's not worth it. So I would hope that an AI that is trained on all of knowledge would actually pick up those same traits and probably be more enlightened than any human is, because we are limited in how much information that we can absorb and how much of history and philosophy and ethics that we have read, right? So I'm actually less worried about a super AI than I am about an immature, premature teenage AI that has strong capabilities, but no sense of understanding and no sense of a worldview.
I think that makes sense. It's an interesting perspective for sure. I think that perhaps one thing you could touch on, though, that other people worry about is that we'll lose control over our lives in some sense. Like, for example, we take good care of our dogs, but we ultimately decide if they live or die. Usually it's for a good reason, like, they have cancer and they're in pain and so on. But, at the same time, it's not like the dogs are in control of their destiny.
Yeah, well, I mean, it depends on who you believe. I mean, free will may actually be an illusion. So our sense of control may not be as much as we think it is. Read some Robert Sapolsky or something, or Sam Harris, and I think you might understand what I'm talking about. But essentially, we are a product of our genetics, and then we are a product of our experiences a lot more than we are a product of our rationale. And having a benevolent philosopher king overseeing us may actually give us a lot more peaceful and healthy existence than today's leaders who are much more self-serving, warmongering, and nepotistic, as we've seen recently. um, so I would be a lot worried about how our leaders today are managing the world and the freedoms that we have or the lack of because of them than an AI who is trained on all of history and philosophy and psychology and sociology, etc.
That's interesting too. I think that an AI that's actually considering a lot of angles of a problem, that really understands philosophy and so on, could probably make very good decisions for everybody. It's just that it would be such a major change for society, right? We're used to being in control of our destiny, even if that means we can like run headlong into a wall.
Well, you can still do that if nobody is going to, just because you have AI providing you everything and making you healthier, you could still jump off a building. Nobody's going to stop you from doing that, right? But I think in terms of would a government be better with AI either as a oracle to teach us how to run it, or as maybe even a direct operational governance be better than our current state today of who we pick. Because even when you talk about democracy, it's not really democracy. I can't pick from anybody in the country. There's usually two or three people that have been selected by a small number of people to say, here are your choices and here's the policies. And in fact, no matter who gets in, there may be another group underlying behind them that's telling them the policies to actually instill. So it's an illusion of control that we have with today's democratic processes.
It's very isolated or separated, I guess, from true decision making, right? You are picking amongst a small set of candidates who then go and make decisions on your behalf amongst some set of proposals that actually make it that far. Very far from like direct democracy, for example, where you can actually say, for this decision, I disagree or whatever.
I mean, there's really very little that any individual in the country can do to change the Washington or maybe even Canadian policy today, right? And these are supposedly the most democratic places in the world today. So I don't know if we're going to be losing much from having that higher knowledge. Again, as an individual, you can still go doing the things that you want to do, but now you actually don't have the obligation of going into a 9 to 5 job every day and just to make ends meet. You'll have enough abundance that you can go educate yourself, you can go travel, you can spend time with family, you can be more healthy, you can go hike around the woods or whatever makes you happy. You could go teach kids or go take care of elderly, right? It's people talk about UBI and they think, oh, UBI is being paid not to work. I actually think that's the opposite. UBI is being paid to do what you love doing, right? It's to do the work that you really enjoy. And I think when you look at it from that perspective, it is not about welfare. It's not about this welfare state of people being lazy and sitting at home and just watching TV or taking drugs. That's what a lot of Americans think UBI represents. But at the end of the day, what it means is now people have the choice to say, how do I spend my time? How do I spend that 10 hours a day that I spend going to and from work and doing work that 80% of people don't enjoy, right? Only 20% of people actually enjoy the work that they do. So the other 80%, if you give them a choice to say you don't have to work, what would you do? They wouldn't choose to do what they're doing. They would choose something else, right? And if you look at the real studies on UBI, what they find is that people don't go and spend it on gambling and drugs and whatever. They actually use that money on educating themselves, on entrepreneurial paths, on getting more healthy, on travel, these kind of things, right? And when they did these studies in Europe, that's what happened. The problem with the U.S. Welfare system is that they put constraints in, and they say, oh, your bank account can't be over $2,000. If it is, I'm going to cut you off. So what does the person do? They're like, okay, well, I'm on welfare. If I go work, I'm going to have more than $2,000. I'm just going to stay on welfare. I'm just going to stay at home. I'm not going to work. So the policies are actually incentivizing people to do the opposite of what we want as a society. So if you have a chance, there's a book called Utopia for Realists. It's a really good book about how UBI can actually be put in place in a reasonable way, and real studies that's been done around the world that show that it actually works.
I'll definitely check that out because I'm quite interested in the topic. And yeah, there's like so many studies that show the best way to lift people out of poverty is literally give them money, right? Like in South Korea, when they're trying to like, this is not poverty related, but when they're trying to get people to have more kids, it's just better to give them money right away. It's like, it has twice the usefulness as like, a tax break sometime in the future, some years in the future, whatever.
Yeah, well, South Korea is not a great example for that because I think their current birth rate is 0.92 per woman.
Oh, it's less than that. It's like zero point 0.7 or something.
You need a 2.1 to have just a replacement rate. So they're actually probably one of the worst places in the world right now in that area.
Well, that's why they're talking about like ways to improve this, right? Because obviously they're in the worst state. So
Yeah. So there's also a lot of people who say, oh, having not enough kids is actually the real danger. I'm not sure if that's really the case, considering that for the majority of human existence on this planet, we had something like 100,000 humans, right? Over the last, a few, I guess, tens of thousands of years, we've come from like a million humans to 8 billion. Our kind of natural balance with the world is probably a smaller number than it is today. And even then, the total birth rates in the world, we're still growing our population as a global species, right?
and when you start having a lot of labor done by AI, then the reasons to worry about not having enough people, like the jobs aren't getting filled and so on, doesn't matter.
In fact, it's not just AI; it's actually now robotic. Because you hear about people say, "Oh, well, the danger is that you're going to run out of kids, and then all these elderly, we can take care of them." The thing is, there's twofold. One is AI. If they solve our health issues, we're actually going to have productive, healthy into our late age, so we can actually continue to be active in society and not need to be taken care of by the young. The other thing is robotics coming in to do a lot of the labor work that used to be what the young people used to do. So we're still using very traditional thinking of where society is headed by looking in the past, when we really need to be looking at the future of what are the real constraints. It used to be labor was the constraint for economic growth. Labor is essentially going to become free, right? Both cognitive labor and manual labor will become free. So the driving assumptions of what made capitalism and even socialism is all based on the labor as the main driver of growth and progress. When labor becomes free, there's so many things that we need to rethink of how our economy should work, how our society and humanity itself, what is our relationship to each other, to our country, to our company. These things all change. And I think we actually start to go more back to where we were for most of human existence. We were in an egalitarian society where you were in small tribes of between 30 to 150 people, and you had all you need. You worked 2-3 hours a day, and you spent most of your time communicating with each other and enjoying the social aspect of a tribe, right? And there was no tier system. Essentially, the leader of the tribe ate the same food as the kids or the women or whatever. They just divided up what they needed to do, and they did it. Everybody lived in the same houses, the same huts, or the same caves. So we have the ability to actually give that level of equality back and focus more on developing the self versus on the competition of hoarding and the competition of being, of having power, right? So I think we need to change, what is the purpose of life? What is the purpose of existence? Right now it's about gathering wealth, gathering power, gathering influence. And is that really what we're here meant to do? And so there was a quote from Pablo Picasso that really spoke to me. And then both my parents are artists, so I really, kind of this spoke to me. He said, "The meaning of life is to find your gift, and the purpose of life is to give it away." and he didn't say the purpose of life is to make as much money as possible or to get on the cover of Forbes magazine. And the fact that you're giving it away is the purpose really is telling, because it means that you want to create what you are really good at, your gift, and you want to share it with the world. And I think when if that's really everybody's purpose, if that's how we want to educate our future generations, we stop fighting and hoarding and creating these unnecessary conflicts in the world.
Well, that sounds like a beautiful future, and I hope we can get there by creating more optimists. Maybe that's a good step along the path. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about at the end here?
No, I think we've had a fun and long conversation. I guess my only suggestion is for people who have time, do some reading. I think there's a lot of content in here that we didn't get to, which I think could benefit a lot of young people particularly, because I think they're so focused on short form content. They're looking at these 20, 30-second TikToks, and podcasts like yours that are longer form, and also books. I think is where we need to get people to get a deeper understanding and to have the nuanced view on what's happening in the world, versus having a very shallow understanding and then thinking that you know. So, and then at that point you have the facility to make your own decisions, and that's what we want, is to give that agency back to people, and hopefully we make the right choices. And it's important what choices we do make in the next 5 to 10 years, because those are the most critical years, I think, of humanity up to now.
It's an interesting time to be alive, as many people are saying, and I agree with them.
Yes, we are lucky, and hopefully we not only are we lucky, we are also, because at this time, we also have a high responsibility, and we need to take that responsibility very seriously, because what our generation chooses is going to have long-term impact.
With that, I think we'll wrap up the video for today. If you liked this video, make sure to check out this previous one I made about how you can prepare for the coming of AGI. It's also an optimistic video, so I think you'll like it. That's all we have for today. Thank you very much for watching. Bye.